Hello, International School of Indiana community. I am Elizabeth Head. I'm the head of school, and we are happy to be with you today for our final uh, monthly Heritage Panel podcast recording. We have some of our ISI community members with us today, ready to share about Asian American heritage in celebration of this month. And as a strategic priority of our school, our pillar one of the strategic plan is building community culture. So we have committed for a few years now to focus every month on celebrating a different group within our community, really with the purpose of telling people's stories about what it's like to live in the United States, in Indiana, being part of this group, this month being about Asian American heritage. And it's just a way for us to get to know each other and build community and build culture by telling who we are. So thank you for those who are viewing, and thank you so much to our moderator and panelists who will introduce themselves here in a minute. Anasuya, our moderator, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Anasuya Das, and I am an ISI parent. I have two kiddos. I have a son finishing up fifth grade and actually finishing up elementary school, which is kind of crazy in the Spanish track, and a daughter who will be finishing up second grade in the Spanish track. I'm very excited to be here and to talk to our panelists today. We have Stephanie Ho and Gary Mo, and who will begin by introducing themselves, and then we will kickstart the panel. So let me start with Gary first. Gary, if you want to introduce yourself, that'll be great. Thank you.
Yes, of course. My name is Gary Mo. I'm a proud parent of Isaac Mo, who is also finishing up elementary school in the fifth grade program in the French program. I'm originally born in Shanghai, and then I went to Canada when I was quite young. I'll be sharing that perspective as well as my American perspective of my journey to North America. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on this panel. Stephanie Ho. I'm a proud parent of three ISI students. They're all in the Mandarin track. So we've got Lauren, who's finishing up seventh grade, Colson, who's finishing up sixth grade, and Reagan, who's finishing up fourth grade, who's super excited to be the big girl on campus, the fifth grader next year at the lower school. And so we've been part of the ISI family since about January 2021. We moved during COVID.
Right. Thank you. And I think between all of us, we have all the three tracks covered. So that's great. So Stephanie, I'm going to start with you with the first question. And if you could tell us something about your ethnic or racial heritage, that'll be really great.
Sure. Yeah. So my mom is from Taiwan and my dad is from the Philippines. And both of them have been there for multiple generations from each country. Both of them have ancestral roots from Fujian province, which is the southeast of China. And Taiwan was actually where my parents established their family. So I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, along with both of my siblings. And I have Mandarin as my first language. And when I also picked up Taiwanese, which is a dialect that is spoken on the island of Taiwan. And so culturally growing up in Taiwan, we experienced basically a mix of Chinese and Japanese influences. Chinese for the main reason that there's a lot of immigration that happened over the course of history. So many Taiwanese have Han Chinese background, and Japanese influences really from the 50 years or so that the Japanese actually occupied the island of Taiwan. And so if I can maybe just share a few things about my culture, I think the culture of respecting elders and authority is really deeply ingrained into how I was brought up, the concept of family, respecting your parents, honoring your mom and dad, and all of your relatives who are around you and supporting you growing up. And so I think a big part of that is kind of the Confucius philosophy that we were taught in school growing up. In terms of holidays, we celebrate special occasions like the Lunar New Year, which is a big deal, as we know, Mid-Autumn Festival, Lantern Festival, Dragon Boat Festival, and then also birthday traditions. We have our own, tradition where we wear really bright colors and we usually eat long noodles for longevity. So those are like, a few things that we introduce into our culture, and of course, food. Taiwanese love texture in their food. Anything that's got like a chewy texture, you can attribute that to kind of the Taiwanese flavor and favor. And then savory broths and stews and soups. So just giving you a highlight of, there's special occasions, there's the concept of respect, but also food is where I would say we're introducing that into our family. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I think the concept of respect resonates a lot because when I moved to the US, the prospect of calling everyone by their first name was very foreign to me. We never do that. We always auntie or uncle, even if you're not related.
Right.
So it
Yeah,
was
for
really
sure. Miss or
hard.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now we always say Miss so and so, Mr. so and so, no matter
Mhm.
what,
Right.
But yeah, thank you so much for your insight. Gary, how about you? What can you tell us about your ethnic or racial culture?
So as I mentioned, I'm born in Shanghai. I come from actually a very large family. I was product of one child policy. So even though I'm an only child, I had about 40 cousins. So a lot of times we celebrate a lot of things that Stephanie has mentioned together as a family. One thing that might not be as apparent to me because I moved away from China to Canada when I was quite young, around 8 years old. I grew up only knowing some of the basic things about the culture. Other things I learned is actually more in the lens of a Chinese immigrant family. Where a Chinese immigrant family, I think they were focusing a lot more on integration into society as well. A lot of things that we were doing, we were focusing more on things like networking with your group, identifying like where you were, whereas where you grew up and where you're from, where you were born, you already have that solid foundation. So there was a lot of emphasis on that. Also, of course, establishing yourself in society as immigrant family was actually quite important and a big part of my growing up. For example, pursuing really high grades in school, respecting some of the guidance of your family was very important. The other thing that was quite big in my family was actually being Buddhist. We're a long line of Buddhism in our family, and a lot of times, no matter where you go, you can find some versions of that Buddhism and different communities, different cultures. Actually, it's quite surprising how many different cultures share that religion. It's actually very nice to learn from those communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We'll continue with you since your microphone is working so well right now. So what can you tell us about your family's immigration to the United States? You alluded to, when you moved to Canada, what were the steps you took to kind of establish yourself there? So what happened when you moved to the US, and what were the challenges and successes that you faced, and how did you overcome those challenges, so to speak?
Yeah, so like I said, when I moved when I was quite young, one of the things that affect children when you're moving into a new environment is a feeling of isolation, right? When you move to a new community, you don't have the friends, you don't have the same family. Again, coming from a large family, that was quite the shock for me. One thing that was helpful was, like I said, trying to find communities that you can network with. Lots of friends that became very close. So, in fact, I've even now as an adult, I find that I'm very close with some of the friends where, they almost feel like family because you had to be able to fill that hole as an immigrant when you're taken away from where you were comfortable. The other thing that was quite successful, I think, with the immigration process, as well as integrating into society, was understanding the culture that you're into now. As a child, I think what was really helpful was for me to watch movies and shows and cartoons. It may, at the beginning, you talk like a cartoon character, but that's okay because eventually you start to learn to speak normally. But you start to understand what are the humors. Even those things can be very subtle differences between culture. And that's a very important for, especially at a very young age, to be able to use that to connect with the kids in your new environment, right? One of the things I've found was very great as a child was Robin Williams movies. Those are fantastic in identifying humor as well as learning empathy and human nature. I think those movies were very important and very impactful for me. In fact, I really felt that was important enough for all immigration process. So when I was in high school, I started volunteering at a community center to help immigrants establish themselves in their new country. So advising them on how to make friends, advising them how to connect with different resources, advising them how to connect with different networks that would help them with that process. And the ones that really reached out and followed those advice that were ones we saw that were thriving, whereas the other ones struggled a bit when they were keeping themselves isolated. I think that was a very important part of that process.
Thank, thank you. I just want to make sure my microphone was on. Um, you did talk about, adapting and watching movies to establish yourself here. I was just kind of curious, how was your experience when it came to celebrating festivals or holidays? And was there anything that stood out in your experience?
Yeah, luckily for us in Canada, there's actually a fairly large Chinese community. So especially where we were living in Toronto, there was a large community where there was that celebration that was happening. A lot of these large venues, like large malls, will host these parties, these festivals, and they were great to attend. When we moved to Indianapolis, obviously the community is not as large, but we were still able to identify festivals, for example, at the local temple that was celebrating Chinese New Year, which is very festive to go and to attend. And what the interesting part is you see different Asian cultures in those, right? Whereas in Toronto is more of the Chinese background. Here, a lot of these temples are more the Vietnamese background. But it's still very interesting to see the similarities and the things that we were celebrating.
Yeah, true. Thank you so much. How about you, Stephanie? Can you tell us a little bit about your family's immigration to the United States and the challenges you faced and the successes of your transition?
So there's some similarities here. So we actually moved to the States at when I was 8. So similar to Gary at the age of 8, moving away. And my parents actually basically brought us to the States because they wanted a different educational experience for us. My dad predominantly was educated by American teachers when he was growing up in the Philippines, and he found that to be much more progressive, and the way that the American education was basically taught him how to think more innovatively and outside of the box. And so what was happening actually on my front, I went through elementary school, first, second, and third grade in Taipei. And frankly, it just was not working for me. There was a lot of rote memory that was required, and it did not engage me. I did not apply myself. And so I think in Taiwan, starting with the first grade, you start getting ranked in school. And so there was a ranking for how you're performing. And so I was either the second to last place or last place. My parents like, wow, you really need to try to be last place, and you're earning that really, really well by not applying yourself, right? And so it just was not working for me. And so I remember when we moved to the States, our first place that we lived in was actually in the Bay Area. So we were there for about a year before we moved down south to Orange County. That's where we settled for the following many decades. But I remember when we drove away from the airport that day when we landed in SFO, we drove away, and the three of us, so myself and 2 siblings, we knew that this place is a place that would be very friendly to us. So we knew Americans as very friendly. They would greet us. And I remember just waving to everyone that was driving by, and they all waved back. I'm like, wow, this is a beautiful place. Everyone's friendly, everyone's smiling at us. And so that was my initial kind of encounter with kind of the American friendliness. But shortly thereafter, we were enrolled in school, and that's when we were immediately confronted with our first racism and discrimination. They weren't just coming from Caucasian kids, but they were also coming from immigrant kids as well, ironically enough, because they have already assimilated. And so here we are. We sounded different. I had a very heavy Taiwanese accent. I looked different. I dressed different. We were eating different things. My parents would pack us different things to go to, school with, and the snacks that they gave us were very different from what the kids were eating. So that was when I realized, you know what? I don't know if this is going to be our home. But I think there was something inside me that got me a bit angry that I was being treated like this. I never experienced it before when I was in Taiwan, of course, much more homogenous society there. But something clicked in me. And it was in that moment where the taunts were coming from the kids. They were making fun of my accent, making fun of the way that I looked, the things that I was eating, that I vowed to myself that I would actually speak better English than all of them combined. So that was something that, was a bit of a trigger for me. And that was the moment that I started to apply myself. So I started to do well in school, but before that, there was no trigger. I didn't need to apply myself, right? So it was actually a good thing that came out of that. And the funny thing is, Gary said, he was watching cartoons. My parents actually forced us to watch Sesame Street. And so because it was a requirement, I'm like, man, why do I have to sit here and watch Sesame Street? And so I remember that being one of those things that my mom said, you got to watch this so your English can get better. And then fast forward to high school, because we knew how difficult it was to get assimilated and just to speak even proper English the right way. My sister and I actually started a club in our high school called ACI, which is Asian Culture International, that we wanted people to just feel like they could have a safe space to share their culture, to allow others to come in and learn about our culture, and for us to kind of share different experiences and challenges amongst each other and be a support network for each other in this high school.
That's very interesting. Two things that come to my mind was that watching TV to learn a language, and I feel like my
Yeah.
kids do that right now. Like, I don't know a word of Spanish, and so when they were learning Spanish, it was like all the teachers were like, watch the cartoons, watch Netflix in
Right.
Spanish, which is pretty amazing how it still holds. And the second thing, a little bit more profound, is this concept where you had the safe space, because I think a lot of the issues around the othering is ignorance, right? It's been people don't know something. So having the safe space and allowing people to come and talk, but also others to come and learn about things they don't know, I think is very critical, no matter what stage of life you're in. I feel that's really useful. Thank you. So Stephanie, we'll go to you now. And if you can talk about your American experience and how, your race and ethnic heritage has influenced it and vice versa.
Yeah, so if I think about my American experience, we've now been in the States for now 40 years, right? And so at this point, I am more American than I am anything else, right? And so growing up, I was what people would call the third culture kid, meaning not really fully Taiwanese anymore and not fully American. And so I was somewhere in the middle in this unknown space where my sister and I had to and my brother had to figure out, who are we anyways, right? And so people didn't really know how to place us, especially after a few decades of being this third culture family with different cultures mixed in. My dad's, Filipino Chinese, and then my mom's from Taiwan, and now we're American. And so we had to figure out how to define who we are. And a big part of that was also our faith, right? So we're Christian, and also understanding that, where are we grounding ourselves? Of course, we've got all of these different ethnic cultures that we're embracing, but at the same time, truly knowing who we are in our religion, in Christ, is really, really important to ground us as individuals. And so one of the things that my parents would always remind us is what we would say in Mandarin, 不要忘本. 不要忘本 basically means don't forget your roots. Even though you're now becoming more American, don't forget the roots that you came from. And so I still remember, those words. My parents and we talk about that. And I think that's the reason why I think it's really important for our kids to understand where their roots are, right? So from my side, having that Mandarin as it was my first language, and now they're learning their mother tongue is really, really important, so that they understand where their family came from, what really defined the cultural background that is a part of who I am. And so I think that's really important. And then at the same time, I think Gary's back.
Yep.
Hey, Gary.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. We can hear you now. So I think one of the things that at the same time of not forgetting our roots, but also embracing fully what it means to be American, right? Celebrating all the cultures that we have or the holidays that we have, but also understanding that we get to define our own Americanness. That's what this country is founded on, melting pot concept, right? And so I think knowing that I'm unique, each of us are unique, we get to tell our own American story. There's not a one size fits all, which the society loves. They love to put label and categorize people in a one size fits all approach to bucketing and placing people. But that's not who I am. That's not how any of us are built in this country. We are very, very unique, and we each get to tell our own story, right? So I think even for me to be on this panel thinking about my own story, I'm trying to role model that for our kids, to let them know, hey, you have a voice, you have your own story. This is mom's story, but what is your story that you get to tell when you grow up? And I think it just, it's great that ISI has this stage where they get to shine, they get to express themselves in different ways, whether it be theater or different assemblies where they get to present what they've learned. That's all them learning this tool of telling their own unique story at some point further down the line. So
Thank you. I know that's very, very cool because when I think about it, right, it's not only was there an opportunity for you to come up with a story and design your own story, so to speak, but then I feel our kids also have the choices they can make in order to see where their story is going. It's not like at the end of the day, what was my story? But they can actually in real time decide what their story is going to be in some ways, which I think is
exactly.
when I see my kids doing that in real time, it's really fascinating for that they have that choice to decide and kind of write their own story, so to speak. Thank you so much for that insight. Gary, do we have you back? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Apologize for the technical difficulty.
Oh, no worries. So I'm going to get this question back to you now. So if you can talk about how your race or ethnic heritage has adapted to or been influenced by your American experience.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think Stephanie may have touched upon too is that the need for a lot of the expectation from society that we kind of fit into some type of mold, right? Like, I believe that's, and to build up on that, it's not just that, there's also the expectation that you will assimilate to some level. And whether or not you assimilate well or not, that can be used as a detriment or viewed as something that you're not doing successfully. And I think that's part where, especially when you're young, you're very sensitive to that. You tend to see part of your culture. Is this something of value? Do you see something that's maybe people identified as wrong with you? I think that's very hard for a child to really see that. And growing up, to be able to consolidate how you're feeling about yourself and how you're feeling about your place in your new home. That's actually can be very difficult for someone they're already dealing with a lot of things growing up. It can be difficult for them to navigate. One of the things that I believe that I did a lot, and perhaps overcorrected, was assimilate quite a lot, right? So I probably now at this point identify more as North American than I do as Chinese. But at the same time, there's still a lot of these parts of your background that you cater to, you fall back on, things that value that you grew up with that you learn from your parents, that you learn from your friends that have similar cultural backgrounds. I think that's still very important to carry with you as you go into your identity. I really appreciate Stephanie saying things like you get an opportunity to really speak to who you want to be and choose who you want to be. And I hope that I can convey by demonstrating what I have carved out to be my identity, that my child and his friends that may have similar backgrounds can help find their place as well. They are going to be different, right? Race has taken into consideration, whether or not it's implicit or it's unconscious. These are things that will affect some bias to some level, whether or not it's actual real bias or something that you just perceive it is. It does affect how you see yourself, how you perform, how you take action, how you make decisions. So as long as we can teach our children, and it was a tough lesson for me to learn, which is to be comfortable with who you are, even though you may not be exactly who people expect you to be, that's okay. You have the right to do so. You have every privilege in our society to be who you are, and you have the right to pursue your own identity, your own happiness. If I could take away from that and I can convey that to my kids and his friends, as I said, that would be a big success on my behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that reminds me of what I think Stephanie said once before, that we are a melting pot, right? So what means to be American is you get to decide what means to be American to you. And I think that's we think about it, a very weighted idea. Like there's nothing American other than what you want it to be. So thank you for that, Jerry. I'll stay with you right now and we'll talk about racialization. And I was just curious if you have encountered race as an element in your experience in the United States.
Of course. I think the experience of racism, no matter where you are in Canada and US, that does happen. And I completely agree. For some strange reason, some of the people that actually express a lot of racism towards us were the people that are the same race as us, that may look down upon some people that may not have assimilated as quickly. You may be seen as inadequate, have not reached their, I don't know, Pokemon evolution, whatever they want to perceive it as. But it's true, it's real, it's something that you have to deal with. I'm very happy to be in ISI where this is not a major issue. Right? This is something that, as a school that's so celebrating multiculturalism, that I don't have to worry about that as much for my child. But outside, he does have to be concerned. He does not, he may not be aware of them just yet. He did not see it in the same light. Him being a second generation, may not be as painfully aware. And as I said earlier, a lot of these perceptions may just be your own internal dialogue. It's not actually happening outside. If someone looks at you differently, it's not because of your race, but you will perceive it that way. I think that's something difficult for people to try and get grasp of. Like, what is the real issue that you have to deal with? But at the same time, I see race being as something that people can see in many different ways, especially growing up as a child when you're trying to assimilate or fit into your new culture. You can see a race almost as like something you want to dilute in some ways as you're assimilating, right? You want to try and fit in. There was a really good movie called Dee that was released. It's not very PG friendly, but it was probably one of the most accurate depiction of what it's like to be an immigrant child growing up. There were many instances where the main character is trying to play down his Asian background, right? In some ways, a lot of us feel that way. But looking back, I think that was a huge detriment growing up because I could have been more proud of who I was as an Asian American, Asian Canadian. I could have been more strong and kept stronger ties with that root. Would I do it differently now knowing this? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think a lot of us have hindsight. But at the same time, when you're dealing with those problems, you are dealing with very real and problems that affect not just your standing, but your mental health as well. So struggling with a lot of those issues and learning to navigate, I think everybody kind of finds their own way around it. I just found that assimilating as much as possible was my way of dealing with some of these uncertainties and anxieties. But I hope my child has the confidence to find his own way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you have to also keep in mind, like when you were assimilating, you were a child, right? And the child's psyche is so different. It's so much easier to try and assimilate instead of holding on to your culture. And I came in at a much later stage. I came in when I was in college, and I don't know if I consciously tried to assimilate or not, but I also encountered a lot of, so to speak, reverse racism where I'm not Indian enough for a lot of the Indians and I'm not American enough for a lot of the Americans. So it's neither here nor there. And again, looking back, I don't know if I would do anything different or not, but it is what it is. Stephanie, do you have anything to add from your experience?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the topic of racialization, I think over the years, if I really look for it, it is there for sure. This is something that can't be ignored. But at the same time, what has happened over the years of being here is that we have experienced a lot of negative interactions, but much more so kindness and understanding as well. But sometimes what scars us as kids are those negative taunts or, pranks that they would play on us, right? And so I think most of those negative interactions happen when we were more kids, less so as adults, right? And so I think now as an adult, one of the things that I look for is true intent. Is this interaction meant to diminish me as an individual, or are they just purely ignorant? And this is an opportunity for me to teach them something that they can learn about me as an individual. So if there's any opportunities like that, whether it be, walking by and there's some kind of noise that's made, or they assume that I am of a different Asian background and they try to speak a different language to me, I say, actually, I am not Japanese. I'm Taiwanese American, and this is how you say greetings, right? And so usually in that moment, you kind of catch them a little bit and they're like, oh, okay, yeah. I said, yeah, let's connect. Is there something that you want to say? And then I can teach you. So usually it's, they don't mean harm. I think some people are just a bit ignorant, but then if I use it as an opportunity to connect, it kind of brings down their guard a little bit. So one of the things that I would say is, of course, kids can be very mean. And when we were moving back from being abroad, so we were living in Germany for a couple of years before moving our family back to the States during the COVID time. One of the things that we were a little bit sensitive about was the whole AAPI movement that was happening. There were some instances of really just horrific, like Asian hate crimes. And so one of the things that gravitated us even more towards the ISI community is that we wanted to make sure our kids were in a safe environment that is allowing themselves to be surrounded by other kids and other families that are open to a global community. So I think that for us was kind of a safe haven. And at the same time, of course, ISI has a Mandarin program. So it was just the best fit for our family, and it continues to be. And so I think just being mindful that, kids will be kids. There's a lot of meanness that's happening, just period. That's just how kids can behave. But on top of that, if there's racialization that's added as a layer that they need to be mindful of, it can create a really bad experience and a poor experience for our kids growing up. And so I think having that really safe space where, ISI, I think as a school, as a community, is really open about talking about these challenges and differences. And this panel is a case in point. We're talking about challenges, Gary and I, like, it's not an easy story to tell because some of that takes a lot of reflection and many years of healing from some of those negative experiences. But at the same time, if it's not discussed, it will be manifested in other ways, much more, people will talk and the kids will be made fun of. And then if we don't address it as adults, it is either condoned or, worse things can happen, right? Or simply our kids are left with a bad experience. And we don't want that. We want them to learn from this. We want them to, grow stronger because of this. And we want them to be even more embracing of other cultures coming out of this. Sorry.
Thank you. It kind of ties back with the club you started in high school, right? Providing a safe space for people to come and connect.
Right.
Stephanie, I'll stay with you right now. What role has your gender played in your American experience? And here.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I would say I think there's a lot of stereotypes around Asian American women and also about Asian American men too, for that matter. And we're either too quiet, too passive, or too loud, too vocal, right? So it's like either way, you don't really kind of win with these stereotypes. But I think what I try to remind myself whenever I might be confronted with some of these, hey, by the way, Stephanie, you seem to be very different for your background. I would ask, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? They're like, well, you know, in your culture, people are generally more quiet or reserved, but you seem to speak up, speak your mind. I was like, well, that's who I am, right? So just having that conversation with people to say, well, that's not generally true. I know a lot of people who are not in the background. They step up, they step in, they lean in. And so just having a conversation about that and then using my voice strategically, right? I'm not the most vocal in a lot of forums, but when I'm asked to speak, I will use my voice strategically to tell my story and get my point across. And so ultimately, I would say maybe the gender itself, it's not that pronounced for me. I think ultimately it boils down to me wanting people to know me as Stephanie, as who I am, regardless of you know, Americanism, my Taiwanese background, my gender, where I grew up. I ultimately really want people to get to know me as an individual.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, this ties in with they want to know you and your unique story and who you are as a person, and independent of all the generalizations.
Right.
Gary, what role has gender played in your American experience?
Yeah. So immigration, as I said earlier, does present a different challenge for a lot of families. For example, when you're an immigrant son, there's a lot of emphasis for you to, you know, become a very strong breadwinner. These are very traditional views, of course. I recall a really funny joke that a comedian said about immigrant parents, and that their expectation of their son is you're either a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. So a lot of these things do resonate, like they stay with you. I'm not sure if those were benefited me in terms of like pushing me for academic success and pursuing lucrative, rewarding careers, but at the same time, I felt that they potentially also limited me. I didn't exactly fit into my parents' expectation in the end because I just realized those are not the things I was interested in doing. But that was really hard to move away from, right? Especially when, as the old immigrant adage, your parents suffered a lot to bring you to where you are, to give you opportunity at a better life. Don't let it go to waste. That always stays in the back of your mind. Are you living up to their expectations? And the same way as I said earlier, that could have been a benefit, the push that you needed. But at the same time, I felt that it really limited my horizon. It also brought anxiety as a child. Like when you're not doing as well as you should be, that makes you feel very bad, even though you're really trying your best. So that's kind of the things I really want to move away from with my child. Still pushing for academic success, but don't have as hard line of the expectation, the hard parenting, the black and white outcomes that you can achieve or just fail at. There's no in between. So I really hope that my child, my parenting, would not put that kind of pressure on my children. But then at the same time, you know, growing up as a male immigrant, there was also an expectation around you being emotionally less focused, right? Again, going back to the financial and academic performance, there was not as much emphasis on mental health well-being, right? There's a lot of keeping your emotion to yourself. Maybe that's something shared across cultures, maybe not just immigrant, but I don't recall discussing my feelings all that much with my parents, which I don't think was a good thing because as Stephanie and I both shared, the kids were dealing with a lot, right, when we're integrating. It would have really helped to be able to talk to your parents and have them be aware of these situations. Now, I understand where they were coming from. There's a lot of things that they were dealing with themselves. And for them, very likely that their emotional well-being were put on the back burner as well. So I think that experience really focused too much on the daily activities, not so much on your mental health, your health and well-being. I do believe that detrimented myself as well as some of the people I've known, like my friends growing up as immigrant as well. They have suffered some of these things that they potentially will have to deal with as an adult. Therapy is very great for dealing with things like that, to talk with someone. And if I see that same thing happening with my child, I would recommend for him to use therapy to help with correcting or helping with his mental well-being. I'm hoping he doesn't have to deal with as much of that as I had to. So from that perspective, I'm hoping him to be a more well-rounded Asian American male growing up in North America. But yeah, that's definitely has an impact, and gender is something that that has a role, that it has impact, but at the same time, gender nowadays is not as clear cut anymore, right? We're seeing a lot more in between gender variations, and we have to respect that. As growing up as an immigrant, that was not even discussed. It was very, very few people actually were even considering that. That's more of the traditional conservative thinking, and I'm hoping that also would go away as we progress more and more into modern society, as we become more and more of everyone's needs and wants. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary and Stephanie, for your insights today. And we talked about this. I think both of you alluded to being so grateful for the ISI community and the platform that ISI provides us to talk about our story, and the community it provides us for our children. So in closing, I'd like to ask each of you to tell the audience what's important about sharing your story here in the context of your relationship with ISI. And Stephanie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I would say I think probably one of my vision is to see our kids start telling their story. So maybe there'll be a panel at some point where our kids start practicing how to tell their origin story, whatever they're comfortable with, right? And so I think that would be something that would be really neat. And the other thing that I just want to emphasize is that our common ground as a community, as a member of this American society, the common ground is our differences, our uniqueness as individuals. And I think the day where we completely embrace each other for those differences is when we will see a different day than what many of us are experiencing still. Not necessarily within ISI, again, a safe haven for people to express themselves freely. But frankly, we're not seeing that everywhere around this country. And so I think making sure the Asian Americans are embraced, the African Americans are embraced, any ethnic culture is embraced fully, it is what we're trying to achieve here. So really happy with the ISI mission. Keep going, Liz, and the lead team. This is a great cause that's worth championing. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Stephanie. Gary?
Yes, thank you. I echo Stephanie's sentiment. Our differences are some of the best things that culture can offer people, right? We should celebrate that. That's something that, when you embrace the benefit and the highlights of other cultures, your life just becomes richer. You have access to different knowledge, different foods. It's fantastic. I love that aspect of the global community. And like Stephanie said, unfortunately, there are going to be challenges, right? I hope by doing this, we tell our kids, we have gone through this. We have developed tools to help us navigate through those tough times. So please come to us. Like, we can help you sort through these problems. I hope you never have to deal with them. I hope you don't have to go through the hardships that we had gone through. As parents, we always want that for our children. But when they do, we're there. We're going to be there for them. We're going to share their stories. We're going to help them navigate those hard times so that they can be their happiest selves in this wonderful country that does give you opportunity to do so. You might have to fight for it, but you have the right to fight for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you both, Stephanie and Gary, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. And thank you, Liz, for giving us this platform and the opportunity to talk to our community today. We really appreciate everything ISI does for us. Thank you.
Anasuya, Stephanie, and Gary, thank you so much. Just hearing your stories, number one, is such a gift because I get to know you a little bit better by hearing different aspects of what you've experienced. But also what I'm so looking forward to is our community continuing to lean into what Gary said, which is that our differences can be celebrated, and it actually adds to the richness of who we are at ISI and the greater community. So thank you all for listening in, and thank you, Stephanie, Anasuya, and Gary, for giving of your time and of yourselves to help our community to continue to lean into our humanity, which is what in the end this is human beings coming together with our differences and our similarities to connect. So thank you so much for this time, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.